So, I just watched Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse for the third time. And yes, it is one of the greatest achievements in animation and cinematic history. Directors Joaquin DeSantos, Kent Powers, and Justin K. Thompson were able to weave a near-flawless and original Spider-Man story with writers Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, and Dave Callahan, not to mention an absolutely incredible animation team. The film has one of the most varied, unique, and stellar animation styles that I've ever seen in a film, such to the point that I truly believe it has to be studied in animation classes going forward. I mean, they found a way to incorporate vintage and modern comic art styles along with watercolors, patchwork, collages, Zine art, and a bunch of other different styles, many of which required the development of a whole new form of motion language previously unseen in modern animation. Combine this with a stellar voice cast, an incredible script with a shed load of funny quotable lines, a villain who manages to be both funny and intimidating, and you have got one of the greatest movies of the decade, hands down, all of which is especially impressive considering how, as we are now learning, the animators were pushed quite a bit farther than an animation team should. But that's a topic to discuss at a later date. For right now, I really need to talk about this movie, and it goes without saying, but spoilers ahead. Across the Spider-Verse is that rare, incredible sequel to an already incredible movie. They stepped it up in every conceivable way, not just in the animation department, but also in Miles Morales' journey. His evolution encapsulates everything a Spider-Man story should. Meek, mild-mannered teenager is bitten by a radioactive spider, he gains superpowers, he decides to devote himself to a life fighting crime, he stumbles at first before finding his stride and confidence and uses his powers to defeat bad guys and save the innocent. That is basically the plot of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man to a T, and it's done in an amazingly inventive and powerful way so that it still feels fresh after all of these years. This evolution continues through to Across the Spider-Verse. Again, the basic formula feels familiar. Miles' struggle to balance his civilian life and his crime-fighting life rings very similar to Spider-Man 2's plot, except that it takes a wildly different direction. The inclusion of a multiverse and a whole spider society offers Miles something that even Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker never got, a community, a chance to feel like he belongs. Of course, it doesn't really work out, but you get what I'm saying. After Gwen tells him about the Spider Society, of course Miles is going to jump at the chance to join, but when the truth comes out about what the Society does, i.e. letting people die so that the supposed canon doesn't get disrupted, Miles is forced to run and ends the movie more alone and isolated than he's ever been before. I mean, this kid just got told his father is going to die, and then he watched his friend stab him in the back within the same sentence. Then he gets chucked into an alternate universe where his dad is already dead and he is a supervillain.
This is a pretty hardcore origin story.
Miles' journey is both similar and distinct to Peter Parker's in several ways. The same can be said for the actual structure of their movies. Beforehand, we mostly focused on Spider-Man himself, and the characters around him were basically treated as dress setting. They were either obligatory love interests, side family members, or best friends who more often than not turned into supervillains. Spider-Man is ultimately the core focus of the whole film, and everything else is built around him. In the Spider-Verse movies though, we focus on the side characters. Miles' relationship with Peter B, Gwen Stacy, his mother and father, and the later Spider-People is the driving force behind his entire journey. Peter teaches him how to be Spider-Man, Gwen offers him a unique friendship with somebody like him. His father and mother give him the courage to push himself while keeping him grounded. Uncle Aaron traumatizes the hell out of him, but also gives him the confidence to be himself and go his own way. Miles' character is defined by his relationships with his loved ones, and that's kind of refreshing. It's nice to see a superhero portrayed not as some stoic, standalone badass who never lets themselves get close to others, but actually allows people in and becomes a better person for it. Right, Jessica? Right, Miguel? And this brings me to the main crux for this video. Because Miles' story revolves around his relationships with others, the main source of antagonism and conflict also arises from said relationships. While villains like Kingpin, Doc Ock, and the Spot all have their big evil schemes, said schemes are not what is driving Miles to become Spider-Man. If anything, the villains almost feel secondary compared to the real antagonist nipping at Miles' back. His nemesis isn't Spot or Kingpin or Doc Ock or Miguel or the Spider Society. His nemesis is, well, expectations. A through line from Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, and presumably the as yet unreleased Beyond the Spider-Verse are the expectations placed on Miles by the people around him. His parents expect him to succeed in his studies and be open and honest with them. His in-universe Spider-Man expects Miles to follow in his footsteps after just one interaction. His enemies and even his own friends expect him to be a screw-up. Miguel's whole rant during the big chase scene in Across the Spider-Verse centers around his expectation that Miles will cause catastrophe because he's a supposed anomaly. The Spot's thirst for revenge partly stems from the fact that he expected Miles to see his worth as a nemesis, and he never did. Miles spends 2 movies trying to move beyond everyone's expectations of him, something that his graffiti art in the first film makes explicit. In Into the Spider-Verse, he manages to have his cake and eat it too. We see him succeed in defeating Kingpin and Doc Ock while starting to balance a normal school life. However, in the sequel, we see that things have gotten a lot more complicated. He's no longer able to meet everyone's expectations, and even his own expectations start to get challenged. Miles expects the Spider Society to welcome him in, make him feel like he belongs, but in the end the reality of what they are doing completely shatters this expectation. Even his expectation for his friends take a beating. Miles expects Gwen and Peter B to come see him to have his back, but they really don't. Their betrayal is also caused by their expectation of what will happen if they go to see Miles, and this betrayal is likely going to have serious consequences for their relationships going into the 3rd film. I mean, what Gwen and Peter did is pretty beyond the pale. It's bad enough that they know, or at least expect, that Miles' dad is going to die and aren't doing a thing to prevent it, but they actively work to stop Miles from doing the one thing Spider-Man is meant to do at all cost: save lives. Let's take Gwen for instance. In the situation that she was in as a member of the Spider Society, Gwen had 2 morally sound options. Either do the genuinely heroic thing and help Miles to save his dad, or just don't go to see him at all. Those were her only decent choices, and she instead made the most selfish choice possible, going to see Miles, teasing him with this big Spider Society that he's not allowed into and doesn't know it, choosing to leave out the information that his dad is due to be killed before just bouncing out of his dimension after agreeing with Jessica Drew never to see him again. That's pretty frickin' cold, and because of it, Miles' positive expectations for Gwen are absolutely shattered. He can't trust her at this stage. And don't even get me started on Peter. At least Gwen has the excuse of being an isolated and emotionally distraught teenager. It's only natural that she's gonna make 1 or 2 bad choices, but Peter, the literal grown adult, he uses his infant daughter to emotionally manipulate Miles into accepting Miguel's "for the greater good" argument. The greater good. Oh hey, this little bundle of joy that I have wouldn't have been possible without Uncle Ben dying, therefore you should be totally okay with letting your dad die, Miles. Dude, what the hell are you doing? The overarching theme of the harmful effects of meeting expectations reaches a boiling point with Miguel's canon event theory. The entire idea of canon events is based on Miguel's assumption that disaster will occur if things don't go the way that he and his algorithm expects them to. Unless certain things happen, certain people die, then Spider-Man won't become Spider-Man, effectively justifying terrible loss by saying it's for the greater good. The greater good. Miguel and Peter B's argument is that canon events are what make Spider-Man Spider-Man, that without these horrific losses, none of them would have achieved the great things that they did. And if this sounds like a familiar argument, is because it is. We've all heard this from people both in media and in real life, that traumatizing events such as the loss of a loved one leads people to become stronger and better individuals. Except, they don't. Trauma and loss don't come with some silver lining reward. It's a painful and draining thing to go through life with those kind of scars, and it doesn't automatically make someone a better person. Miles and Peter B and Gwen are not made heroic by virtue of their traumas, they are heroic in spite of it, or at least they're trying to be. There is nothing to say that they couldn't have achieved the great things that they have done while still having loved ones like Uncle Ben or Uncle Aaron still in their lives. This is Miles' whole point. No matter how well-intended, people's expectations of him are doing infinitely more harm than good. The entire Spider Society have drunk Miguel's Kool-Aid about canon events, potentially as a way of just coping with their own trauma. Miles is told again and again that he won't win, that he can't save everyone, and that he has to just let certain people die for the greater good.
Shut it!
But instead, he says no. Even if his dad does end up dying, he is never going to stop making the effort to save him and everyone he can. That is the real purpose of Spider-Man. It doesn't matter if saving a life might lead to the destruction of reality, just the knowledge that a life is in danger is enough of a reason to try and save them, especially for someone with superpowers like Miles and the rest of the Spider Society. In that sense, Miguel's paranoia, cynicism, and pessimistic expectations about how to be Spider-Man are actively undermining the whole point of Spider-Man. But for me, the harmful consequences of expectations are spelled out most plainly with just one line from Miles' mother. It's almost a blink and you miss it moment, but it encapsulates everything wrong with her way of viewing her son, as well as everyone else's way of viewing him. During the argument at the party, Miles tries to say to her, "It's my life," to which she replies, "No, it's not your life, it's mine, it's your father's, it's the rest of your family's who got you here." That is one of the worst things that you could say to a confused teenager, that their life is not their own. And that is exactly how Miles has felt since the first film, that he's being pulled in all of these directions, and that he isn't allowed to make his own choices because of everyone's expectations of him. Miles' journey is centered around connecting with the people in his life while maintaining and affirming his sense of agency. He doesn't want to disappoint his parents, but he doesn't want to be beholden to them for the rest of his life. He likes hanging around Gwen and Peter B, but he's not gonna let his father die just because they say so. Miles goes his own way, does his own thing, and we actually see the positive effects that his decisions have on the people around him. According to Miguel's canon event theory, our Miles was never meant to be Spider-Man, but if that were true, Peter would never have met him, which means that he never would have had Mayday, and his universe isn't crumbling down all around him because of all that. Simply by existing, Miles is negating the expectations of others. I'm curious where the creators are going to take the third film. If I were to guess, I would say the theme of expectations will continue and Miles will end up disproving the whole canon event theory by saving his dad. I wouldn't be surprised if Miguel ended up being a bigger villain for Miles than the Spot is, and I'm crossing my fingers that Gwen and Peter B make up with him, apologize, and they do get at least a semi-sweet ending. I mean, the greatest subversion of expectations for a Spider-Man story would be everyone ending up happily ever after, so it would kind of make sense for Miles to just save everyone and win, given the theme. Miles' ultimate victory could come from proving himself right, that there is no canon, that he doesn't need some horrible traumatic event to be Spider-Man, that his way of doing things is totally valid and everyone ends up accepting that. At least, that's where the optimist in me wants it to go. The pessimist in me, though, is imagining the demise of at least one character, and given Spider-Man's propensity for losing mentors, I can think of one character in particular who might wind up kicking the bucket.